What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. Kind of took some time off with my buddy passing last week, his funeral, all that stuff, and the hood we did for him. The video, if you haven't seen that, it's the one before this one, or it's actually the one. Yeah, it's the one before this one. By the time you guys watch it, it should be up and going. So go back and watch it. We did a tribute to him on a little mini hood, aluminum hood that you can buy. And paint up or whatever you want to do on it. Came out really good. His wife was really pleased. His mom loved it. So it's been kind of tough these last few days. So I kind of took a break from doing anything. A couple of days ago, I came out here and I started laying tape on the truck. As you guys can see, I got one side completely done and masked off, and then I realized that I have an issue with it, and I think it's going to be really good, something I can show you guys and teach you on what to do in this situation. To me, it's not a really big deal. It's just going to set me back a few minutes, but I'm going to show you guys what I'm talking about. It's actually in this door jamb area, and it's everything from here up here all the way down to this graphic right here. And I noticed this when I was closing the door. I don't know if you guys can notice it or not, but you can kind of see how everything on this side is going down at an angle, because that's the way it's going on the door. You know, when you're matching up graphics, you look inside the door, everything should be going the same way as it is on the outside. Well, this can get kind of confusing to some people. Like I said, I didn't notice it until I was done, and I was seriously going to shut the door like this, and I was like, oh, that's not good at all. So I'm going to point it out to you guys here if you don't know what I'm talking about. It's the inside of this door right here, all these graphics. You can see it does not line up with this jamb at all. It's up high. So I did this without even knowing it. I did the problem is I did this door first before I did this jamb. And that's another little trick when you're doing graphics and you're getting really complicated like this. You always want to start on, if this was even though this is the cab, back of the cab, if this was a quarter panel or anything like that, and you've done your graphics on the outside, you always want to go from the back panel to the jamb. You never want to go from the door that opens to start doing the inside of the jamb. And reason that being is this right here, it does not line up. Because in your mind, because the graphics are going up and they're kind of going up and over and back and down, your mind says, hey, when you open the door up, they should go up too. And that's not true. They need to go down, as if they were keep going down from the inside. They just need to wrap around, and I've got everything going up. So they just need, all the tape needs to be going down instead of up. And after that, everything should line up, because you can tell it's like a lot. It's not just a little bit off, it's really far off. So I need to rip off all the tape on this door and be really careful with pulling anything up on the lines on the outside here, because obviously it matches up with this out here. So I need to be really careful, peel all this tape off and go back through and redo all of it. Like I said, it's just going to set me back some tape and a little bit of time. It's not really too big of a deal, but thing that kind of separates people as artists, as painters, apart from each other, I would guarantee probably 80 to 90% of people would probably not notice that, and they'd be like, and they wouldn't really notice it until you get paint on it, until somebody mentions it to them. But you always want to go over your work, check it, because if you get that, if it's painted and you're done and you put clear on it, you pretty much have to do that whole jamb back over. So you might as well just stop what you're doing at that time, fix it before you move on. because like I said, there's going to be somebody out there that's going to notice it, and it's not, politically correct when you're doing graphics inside of jams and stuff like that. And little stuff like that just bugs the crap out of me. Um, when you're doing something and it just doesn't look right, just go ahead and stop and fix it. Because, I mean, somebody's going to notice it. I notice it. I'm pretty hard on myself, though. A lot of people are, but especially with doing, custom paint jobs and things like that, there's a lot of people that are really, really hard on themselves. And you just need to be, because a lot of stuff like that would probably get looked over. If I would have just went ahead and not noticed it, I probably wouldn't notice it at all until I, put the door back on it when I had it off and noticed it didn't line up. And then I would be out more time than I am if I would just stop and redo the tape and get it done right. So I want to jump into it. We're going to get this tape peeled off, and then we're going to start laying tape again in door jam. When I start peeling this tape off, I've just got to be really careful to not peel any of the tape off around the edges, because that is connected to the tape that's on the outside. And you really don't want to peel anything off that you don't have to. So the way I taped this off was I fine lined and taped off the outside of the truck first, and then I started doing the jams. So any of the tape in the jams is actually just wrapped around those corners. So when I rip that off, I don't want to really rip it like a band-aid. I want to take it kind of slow, make sure that fine line and that tape on the outside of the vehicle is still intact, because it matches up with the other panel and on the truck. So I want to keep all that intact. The less I have to do, the better. So as I'm starting to lay this fine line down, again, I'm using a FBS. It's an 1/8 inch fine line. And when you're in these jams areas, like on this particular door jam right now, there's a lot of body lines, there's a lot of curves, there's a lot of indents. Things like that are kind of tricky to get right when you're laying fine line, because you want to make sure everything is super, super tight. So I'm just taking my time, making sure I press down the fine line before I move forward. Really, really super tight, because not only is this going to be on the truck for a little bit, but I want to make sure when I lay paint that nothing's going to creep underneath of it. Not being too picky, but I know in the end, if I have any bleed through from the tape to the other panel that's not supposed to get painted, with the truck already being clear coated, I can take thinner or a little bit of sandpaper and actually just rub anything extra off. But keep in mind also, these graphics are getting pinstriped, so that's going to take up some real estate as well. So if it's not getting covered with the pinstripe, I'll just go ahead and wipe it off with lacquer thinner in the end, because there are some things you have to go back through and consider a touch-up, especially in door jam areas. There's a lot of things that could go wrong, so you just want to make sure your tape is nice and tight. Don't stretch it, just let it do its thing, and you will be good to go. You also see me closing the door. Right now I've just got pretty much nothing right now opening the door. I was using a box of plastic to keep the door ajar, but once I start laying this, I need to constantly open and close the door to make sure that tape line is pretty much in the same realm as what it is on the inside of the cab corner jam. And the way I dictate that is as the cab corner jam, where the weather strip and the pinch welds are, wherever that tape is finished off at is going to be where on the door part, where the door panel actually bolts into the door or pushes into the door, whatever one. Every car is different, but you want to make sure those pinstripes on that end edge where the pinch weld is and the inner edge of the door jamb where the door panel is going to be buttoning up to are as close as possible. That's the trick of this, is always want to look, I always start from the inners to the outer. I don't really do it the opposite way. So it's just a little bit of a tricky area to get right. So I'm constantly opening and closing the door, and I'm moving around constantly trying to make sure everything is right. So here is the afterwards of taking everything off. It looks much better when you close the door. It's hard to tell, but you can kind of get the idea right there that everything lines up perfectly. You always want like this area to match up with this area right here towards the pinch welds. It's kind of hard to see, but you always want to get it as close as possible when you're doing that, just because you're going to notice it. I mean, people are going to notice it when you're opening and closing the door. You always want it to look like everything is just as close as possible to being lined up. So when you're doing this type of stuff, especially in the areas that are really tight body lines and all these ups and overs and downs and all that, when I'm laying this fine line in here, I am pressing really tight, like right here, for instance, where my finger's at. I'm pressing really tight before I move on towards the next, towards the end of it. Because if you don't press it right there, you know, get it as tight as possible, over time it's just going to lift up on you, and when you're spraying, that's not good because paint will creep underneath of it, things like that. So you always want to press it in there as tight as possible, make sure it's all flat, there's no bubbles per se in these grooves. And then I always go back through and I'll, what I call outlining the pinch or the tape of where it's going to be outlined with paint. That just holds it more secure for a lot longer time. So I always make sure that is pressed down really nice and tight. This is kind of one of the things where you're going to be wasting a lot of tape. And, you know, there's really no better way to do it. A lot of guys like to use, especially when they're doing the outside, they'll use like a paperback masking, which has a sticky side to it, and you lay it on there and you squeegee it out, and you go through and you just cut all the stuff out if you really wanted to. But inside there, you really can't do that because all the curves and everything in here. So I go through with tape. Like I said, you waste a lot of it, but that's pretty much, for me, it's the quickest way to doing it, honestly. There's really no better way to ensure that it's going to stay there for a long amount of time. So that's just how I do it. And it don't take too long. Like that jam right there took me probably 20-25 minutes to tear all that tape back off and put it back on correctly. And then I'll do the same thing when I get to the other side. Right now, as you can see, this whole side from fender, door jambs to the back is completely done. The only thing I have to do when I get done with the other side, obviously, is to set the bed back and finish running the tape inside of here, because it will go all the way back to the pinch welds that's behind there. But I need to get, the next step right now is to get all this transferred to the other side, because the other side I have not touched at all. I kind of worked on the back a little bit just to get this area done. So I got some of the graphic completed, but I won't finish the back of this until I'm done with the sides. That way I know, because the way this graphic is going, it goes all the way down to the sides, and it goes in a certain spot on the bed sides, and it also goes inside the tail lights here. So everything gets taped off, but you get this graphic from the tailgate all the way, and it finishes off right underneath there. So there's a specific spot that needs to go, and I can't figure that out until I get all this transferred over. So that's the next step. Pretty much all I do is take paper, like masking paper like this, and it's a big sheet. It's a 36 or 38 inch roll, and I'll just roll it all the way down the side, tape it on the other side, not this side, I don't know what I'm showing you the side for, but I will tape it and make it airtight against the truck. And I take a Sharpie and I just pretty much trace all the graphics out. You can take a lead pencil as well, and you can kind of just smear it over the paper, and it'll pick up these lines in between here. And then what you do after that, once you trace everything on the outside, you take what we call a pounce wheel, which is like a little wheel that has spikes around it, and there's different ones depending on what you want to go with. But this one right here, this is a pounce wheel. It's got these little saw blades on it. Always want to do this laying down on a hard surface. Wood works really well if you have a big enough piece of wood. A lot of times I'll use my toolbox topper because it's wood when it's cleaned off. But you always want to do it on a hard surface because you're essentially just rolling that and you're following all the lines you just traced on the paper. And what it does is it makes little holes in it. And then you'll take chalk. Obviously, you'll flip it when you're done doing all the pouncing and all that. You'll flip the paper back over on the other side because you're going to be transferring over on this side. So you got to flip it over, or the chalk or whatever, the pencil, whatever you decide to use, Sharpie lines are on the back side of the paper. Lay it exactly on this other side, which is just flipped in return from the driver's side. And then you're going to make it, I always make guidelines. Like I'll actually draw on this door gap here and the fender gap and the bed gap. I make little marks to where I know on the paper that it's going to be set just right on this side from the other side. So, and then what you do is just take pounce chalk all the way down it, smear it, and that chalk, what it does is it gets in those holes. And once you lift the paper off, you have little dots of chalk everywhere. And that is essentially your outline that you just traced from the other side and pounced. And then that chalk shows up in little dots, and you just go through. And what you want to do is stay on the inside towards the chalk. Actually, no, you want to stay on the outsides of the chalk because the inside of the chalk is essentially the inside of your graphic. So you want to make sure you're on the outside of the chalk edges on those dots and start laying your tape. It takes a little bit of time. It takes a little bit of getting used to. It might seem that it's a lot of work just to get an image transferred, but try doing it from freehand. Try making all those little marks from back and forth. It's a lot of measuring. It's a lot of tedious back and forth with tape, ripping it off, putting it back on. So this way it makes sure that it's 100% exactly like the other side, and you don't have any issues whatsoever with things not lining up right or things looking different from one side to the other. You can always get it really close, and that's how this graphic on this side, making sure it's right on the other side exactly the same. If you haven't, go back and watch that video. I've explained it once. I'll probably show you again when I'm to that stage, but now I'm not completely in a hurry to get everything done here, because essentially all I have to do is lay the tape out on this side, and with that chalk it won't take me probably 40 minutes to lay the tape out, door jambs and all, and then finish up the tailgate. And once I get this thing masked off completely, painting it won't take me probably an hour and a half, and then pinstriping is going to probably take me another 2 or 3, maybe 4 hours to pinstripe everything on it, and then it's ready for clear. So if I really wanted to, I could get this thing done probably in a week, ready for clear coat. But customer's not really in a hurry. He doesn't want to come back. He doesn't want to haul the truck away and feet of snow or anything like that, because it's an open trailer. So he's not in a hurry to get it back over the winter. So I'm going to take my time, make sure it's done extra right, and just go over everything with a fine-tooth comb before I do anything to it, since he has given me that extra time. Like I said, the next show is in April, so he's like, you can have it till March if you need to. So the taping part takes the longest. Actually, ripping the tape off takes the longest. So it's a lot of tape to rip off, and making sure everything's nice and neat and then pinstriping it takes about the same amount of time as laying the tape down. So yeah, it's coming along. I don't know how much I'm going to show. I'm going to try to show you guys the transfer part of it from one side to the next, and after that the painting begins after I lay all the tape. So I won't bore you guys too much. Show you this hood that I got pretty much all masked off. So I'll do this with the sides of the truck as well, and then I'll plastic the entire truck, and then I'll just shove the plastic underneath of here, make sure everything's really nice and tight. The fenders will come off, the doors will come off as well before I start painting, because the colors I'm using aren't candies, so it's a base coat on both colors. So I essentially don't have to have everything on the truck to spray it and make sure it's all one color. I can take things off. So I'm thinking I'm going to take off the doors and the fenders, put them on a stand, that way I can get all the way around them and get them all taped up nice and neat, and then get them all plastic as well as the truck and all that stuff. So yeah, that's the goal, that's the plan. It's a lot of work. I do have my references here, and I've got one for the back as well. So it's nice to have a reference of what you're doing, because I am going to have to, once I get everything taped up, I'm going to have to decide. My picture shows it, but I'm going to have to go through here where it's all looks like a mess. Some of these graphics go on top of the other graphics, and they go inside and out and inside and out. So I got to go through all that as well once I get everything masked off. Because everything inside of here that's not taped, it's just got the fine line, all this is going to get cut, and then it's just going to be one open graphic. Because when I'm going to spray it with white first. I haven't decided if I'm going to do silver or white first, but it needs a base coat on it first to hide everything, and then the colors go over top of that. So I haven't decided if I'm going to use white or silver. The white would pick it up really well, the silver would pick up really well. But I'll probably use silver because that's what I did with everything else. And then once I get the silver on, it will, with all these out, it'll just make it one open graphic, and you won't have these lines when you're done with it. And then I'll go back through and I'll retape all this stuff off. If I'm doing this graphic, because this is one big graphic going down, and then the rest is the other graphics going backwards. So I got two graphics to go back through and tape up. If I'm spraying this one, obviously these are going to get cut off, and then everything else is going to get taped up. So it's going to get kind of, I'm saying, it's going to get a little complicated towards the painting process, but as long as you got your references, as long as you just, make a mental note of it, you'll do just fine. That's one of the big questions I have with doing crazy graphics, especially with a truck that already has graphics. I've never done this type of, I've never done more graphics on top of graphics that were already on the vehicle. So I've been asked a few times, how do you, does it get really complicated for you? How do you, decipher from what you're doing now versus what's already on there? Things like that. And to me, if you're wanting to know that answer, it's just, I go, like anything else, I work in little islands. I don't try to do everything at once. I'll do, like on this side, did all the fine line work on the outside first. So I looked at my reference, and some of the stuff did change where it's at, but for the most part, it's exactly the same as my image. And I just go through and fine line it. And then the next step for me was door jambs. And then I outlined everything and tape. So I don't try to do the whole truck all at once. I just work in islands, and that would make it look so it doesn't bore you out, because you're always doing something different. So some guys do, some guys just knock it all out once, but I'm taking my time on it, making sure it's right, and then we'll get it done, and that way it looks the best that I can get it, the best that it'll be. But I think it'll look really, really cool with everything tied in together. So yeah, that's about it though for this video. I was going to make it a really short one, then I got to talking, so if I jibber jabber too much, sorry about you, but there's a lot to explain. There's a lot of things going on when you're doing this type of work, and I could talk about it forever, but making a video. I'm trying to make them kind of shorter than normal. A lot of times I make these videos like an hour or so long because I want to show everything, but I'm trying to change my ways of how I make videos and starting to edit them a little bit more without cutting too much out, because people don't like to watch an hour-long video anymore. They like to get to the point. So I'm going to start editing things together and kind of changing the ways that I do videos just to make them not as long and a little bit more enjoyable for you guys to watch. So until next time, guys, thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe. There's like 80% of you still that are not subscribed. So just make sure you subscribe. Will help me out. We'll get this channel moving along. And yeah, we'll do some crazy cool stuff. So until next time, guys, later.